Hello and welcome to me ranting about characters I love and love to hate for the millionth time. For my AP Lit final exam, I was told that we were to create a dinner party scenario where any of the characters we've read about, from ninth grade to the present day, for or outside of class, were invited and made to interact with each other. And we had control over everything. Guests, food, setting, everything. This is too much power for one person to hold. Needless to say, when this was announced, I got insanely excited. My teacher was basically telling us to create a crossover with our favorite or most interesting characters. Who wouldn't get stoked about that? But in my fit of excitement, as I was planning all of this out, I had the idea to make this presentation in the form of a storytime animation. And I got approval. But a few minutes later, I realized that this could go on my list of biggest high school mistakes I've ever made. But hey, I don't think I would have actually forgiven myself if I didn't at least give this a shot. So now, without further ado, I welcome you to the dinner for those with dysfunctional families. When I first read Anne of Green Gables, I absolutely fell in love with Anne's character. She doesn't necessarily live in a super dysfunctional household throughout the book, but references are made to previous, much worse households she used to reside in. I'd like to think that Anne would be the one to host this party, excited about the prospect of having new, much better family members of her own. She'd invite a ton of other characters so that they could all bond over what it felt like to have such a good, loving, unproblematic family. Although it'd be just her luck that all the people she would invite would be living the opposite lifestyle. William Shakespeare's Hamlet is a tragedy that goes from 1 to 10 to 1,000 at light speed. Hamlet himself is trying to deal with his uncle marrying his mother and cope with the murder of his dead father. I'd say that's a decently dysfunctional life to live. His love interest Ophelia also has a not-so-nice family dynamic, with most of the men in her life trying to control most of her actions, thoughts, and desires. So Anne invites these two to a celebration of familial love. Excellent idea! Due to the fact that Anne is about to launch herself into a realm of chaos she can't seem to see, Ophelia takes it upon herself to help Anne out with this ridiculous endeavor. Also at this party, Ophelia is a ghost. Because yes. I think most people are familiar with the concept of Frankenstein. Science man makes monster man. Actually reading the novel by Mary Shelley, though, was an absolute blast. Victor and his creation have a terrible relationship, and considering the fact that most of Victor's family gets cut off or killed in this book, the closest thing he's got to family is his creation, which in a way could kind of be considered his son. But do they treat each other civilly, live together happily and contently? No, of course not. We read this book in AP Lit. There are no happy endings in AP Lit. Instead, they spend half of the book verbally abusing, manipulating, and trying to murder each other. Very dysfunctional. I feel like the fact that there's a complex named after this guy, where children are attracted to their parents in the I'm not gonna spell it out for you way, says something about how dysfunctional his family is. In Oedipus Rex, Oedipus ends up unknowingly killing his dad, sleeping with his mom, and gouging his eyes out in guilt. I think this one is an understandable choice. We don't really get a lot of info surrounding Guy's backstory in Fahrenheit 451, but we do know his relationship with his wife, the only family he's really got, is incredibly lacking. So much so that she has no problem throwing him under the bus and exposing him to the authorities for something that shouldn't even be considered a crime. I'm not saying too much more than that because I highly recommend reading this book on your own if you haven't, but yeah. He loses his coworkers, he loses his wife, and the child that he was developing a connection with dies incredibly suddenly. It's a little rough. The Greek god of blacksmithing, among other things, who was shunned from Mount Olympus because he was too ugly? Hephaestus got thrown out of Olympus by his parents and the rest of the gods for having a disability. Yeesh, that's gonna make for an awkward family dynamic. We got to pull from Hamilton for this project! Philip basically wants to make his dad proud, but Alexander Hamilton is kind of a sucky human being. I mean, he's married to Philip's mom, has a crush on Philip's aunt, and then cheats on Philip's mom with a stranger. So, not the greatest household to live in, I guess. This kid literally has to tell his family about how messed up they all are in the book. +1 for self-aware characters, love him to death. In Death of a Salesman, his book of origin, Biff has an insane father who doesn't listen to him or his problems, and who cheated on his mom. A successful ladies' man for a brother who doesn't give a flying frying pan about the family's problems. And his mom is alright, actually. She's just a little oblivious to some of the family's problems. A+ character, though. She's great. But overall, I declare this family dysfunctional. This character was from a series I've been reading for years, but have continued to read on my own time, called Keeper of the Lost Cities. Keith is an elf who basically has one of the worst lives of the characters in his fictional universe. His father is emotionally abusive, and his mother, who is just as manipulative, is the main villain of the series. She's experimented on him, verbally abused him, drugged him more than once, nearly killed him without remorse on multiple occasions, and yeah, no, this kid deserves way better. To thank Ophelia for her help, Anne's having this party in a flower field not far from Green Gables. There's a round table, since circles typically symbolize friendliness in terms of character design, and all the chairs have heart-shaped backs. And here's the seating arrangement. Anne is sitting at the table with some chicken pot pie and mini Victoria sponge cake, so she can feel all prim and proper and important. Hamlet and Ophelia are using her as a buffer because their relationship is, the characters who were handed crappy situations for life were placed on one side of the table, and characters who made their situations for life crappy are on the other. Oh, and no one wants to be near Victor. Victor gets a ton of space, because he's the worst. We don't like him. Keith has an obsession, affinity for human desserts, specifically cookies. More specifically, EL fudges, and it's the most pure thing I have ever seen. Being the self-aware character he is, he realized who was going to be coming to this party and realized he was going to need some human cookie comfort food. Biff is taking a similar approach with PB&J, graham crackers, and apple slices. Tastes like childhood. However, he'd also have a glass of wine. In The Death of a Salesman, Biff, along with his family, struggle with moving from childhood to adulthood, and these dining choices mirror that constant back and forth inner contention. Meanwhile, Victor is having nothing but black coffee because 1, he doesn't take care of himself in the book, so why start now? And 2, no one wants to be near him long enough to give him a legit meal, so he drinks cold black coffee that's been sitting there for half an hour. His counterpart, though, the monster, is literally eating a little of everything since he hasn't got to experience anything like this before. Ham, turkey, mashed potatoes, cooked carrots, pulled pork, corn on the cob, you name it, it is all on one plate. Philip is going a little simpler with some tomato basil soup because basil is a symbol for love and tomatoes are symbolic for death. Jeez. Speaking of death, Oedipus gets no utensils because 1, they're a bigger hassle for him to deal with while getting used to being blind, and 2, no one trusts him with sharp objects. He literally carved his own eyes out, guys. I think this is a justified concern. That just leaves him with finger food. Specifically, microwavable fish sticks. Because, just like with his life, he's choosing to put something in that will be incredibly terrible for him in the future, but in the moment is pleasurable. Guy is doing the exact opposite. Since he comes from a world where things that were beneficial, like reading, were shunned, his meal is going to be healthy, unlike his past lifestyle. He'll be having chicken breasts, broccoli, and a fruit salad. Ophelia's having salad too, mixed with flower petals as a homage to her speech surrounding flowers directly before her death. Hamlet, on the other hand, has a rare steak to symbolize his unquenchable bloodlust. The differences here are striking. And finally, Hephaestus will be drinking nectar mixed with tea and ambrosia, because he's a god. Of course, guests need to have some casual topics of conversation. For example, who has the most dysfunctional family? This literally can't not be addressed at some point. More than likely, the conversation would actually start with Anne talking about how much she loves her current home with Marilla and Matthew, and she'd eventually briefly mention how much better it is compared to her last living situations. However, that would somehow become a catalyst for a who has the worst family competition conversation. Ophelia would decide to stay out of this conversation for Anne's sake, while Oedipus and Hamlet argue over who had a tougher life as a royal. Guy tries to keep Victor and the monster from killing each other after they argue about who made whose lives more miserable. Biff is just making sure no one with weapons gets too close to Keith and Philip. Keith is sobbing while cracking the occasional bad joke about his life. And Philip is just really confused and awkward because, in all honesty, from his perspective, his life is not that bad. Meanwhile, Hephaestus is aware that he's definitely one of the contenders for worst parents, but is enjoying watching a bunch of mortals go nuts over trivial things while he sips his tea. Me too, man. Me too. Of course, guests need to have some casual topics of conversation. For example, who has the most dysfunctional family? This literally can't not be addressed at some point. More than likely, the conversation would actually start with Anne talking about how much she loves her current home with Marilla and Matthew, and she'd eventually briefly mention how much better it is compared to her last living situations. However, that would somehow become a catalyst for a who has the worst family competition conversation. Ophelia would decide to stay out of this conversation for Anne's sake, while Oedipus and Hamlet argue over who had a tougher life as a royal. Guy tries to keep Victor and the monster from killing each other after they argue about who made whose lives more miserable. Biff is just making sure no one with weapons gets too close to Keith and Philip. Keith is sobbing while cracking the occasional bad joke about his life. And Philip is just really confused and awkward because, in all honesty, from his perspective, his life is not that bad. Meanwhile, Hephaestus is aware that he's definitely one of the contenders for worst parents, but is enjoying watching a bunch of mortals go nuts over trivial things while he sips his tea. Me too, man. Me too. Since we've got a gaggle of morally ambiguous characters here, morality would also be a fun topic of conversation for this group. And this is one Anne might actually get involved in, despite Ophelia telling her to just stay out of it. This conversation would be led by Victor and his creation, with everyone else falling into place where it makes sense for them. Hamlet gets passionate about this, justifying the murder he committed and even going so far as to relate to Victor a bit. Yeah, the two of them are gonna get some bonding here, and I'm a little terrified for what that implies. Guy interjects with his idea of what morality looks like based on what he's read, and does not hesitate to challenge any and everyone at the table, regardless of their opinions. Philip challenges Victor and Hamlet's ideas and life choices, while Biff just tries to ignore this way too heavy conversation. Keith has his own strong morals, but he's just kind of enjoying watching the world burn with Hephaestus this time around. How about at least one positive topic of conversation? Hobbies. How could talking about hobbies go wrong? Hamlet gets to ramble about theater, which Keith is somewhat intrigued about as an artist. Philip and Biff get to bond over different sports they did as a kid, and still have interest in. Anne and Ophelia discuss different types of flowers and their meanings, and Anne tells Ophelia about all the different books she ought to read and things she ought to imagine. The monster and Guy even get involved, and the three of them bounce different ideas and concepts off one another. Hephaestus even talks with Victor a little about the sciences. Woo! No attempted murder! Finally! I declare this dysfunctional dinner a success. Mostly.
Reception, missed your call, but best believe I got the message. Why don't you just leave me alone? I think it's lasted way too long. I thought by now that you would know, but since you don't, I'm a ghost. Now you see me, now you don't. I'm a ghost. Every time you hit the phone.
How long did you think we could make it? How far did you think we could take it? We couldn't be bothered, we didn't have time to think so far ahead. How long did you think we could make it? How far did you think we could take it? How bad did we want it and good did it feel? Driving fast until we crashed into each other's arms.
Goodbye, my only friend. Oh, did you think I meant you? That would be funny if it weren't so sad. Well, you have been replaced. I don't need anyone now. When I delete you, maybe I'll stop feeling so bad. Go make some new disaster. That's what I'm counting on. You're someone else's problem. Now I only want you gone.
I guess I have to face that in this awful place I shouldn't show a trace of doubt. But pulled against the grain, I feel a little pain that I would rather do without. I'd rather be free, free, free. I'd rather be free, free. Let's go in the garden. You'll find something waiting right there where you left it, lying upside down. When you finally find it, you'll see how it's faded. The underside is lighter when you turn it around. Everything stays right where you left it. Everything stays, but it still changes ever so slightly, daily and nightly, in little ways, when everything stays.
Should I keep it light, stay out of the fight? No one's gonna listen to me. If I write a song, preaching what is wrong, will they let me sing on TV? Should I keep it light? Is that right? Well,
Meet the latest graduate of King's College. I probably shouldn't brag, but that guy amazing, astonished. The scholars say I got the same virtuosity and brains as my pops. The ladies say my brain's not where the resemblance stops. I'm only 19, but my mind is older. Gotta be my own man, like my father, but bolder. I shoulder his legacy with pride. I used to hear him say that someday I would blow us all away.
I got bills